And good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Art Business Academy Q&A session. Today is Friday, November 10th, 2023. I am glad to see so many of you here on the other side of the daylight saving experience. I was a little worried, as we always are, that we might not make the adjustment, but it looks like we've done a great job of getting through that. You'll notice I'm in an even different setting. I've broadcast from home before. Usually you see our living room bookcase behind me, but today we've got painters out on our patio. We're having the exterior of our home repainted, and it is noisy over there. So I'm joining you from my kitchen this morning. So again, when I'm at home, you may hear dogs barking, people crossing, but we're just going to roll with it. And we've got a great topic today. I've received some excellent questions. As we mentioned last week, it kind of came up spontaneously in talking about newsletters. And we want to dive deep into the question of how to run successful email newsletters, to be publishers of our own newsletters. And I do just want to jump right into the questions. I have, of course, some thoughts, but rather than give you a presentation first and then take questions, I want to jump right into questions and then bring my experience with the Xanadu Gallery newsletter into the discussion. And so we're going to jump in, and I'm going to start with, and I know I have several of you here, and usually I would bring you in to ask the questions live, but you've put such thought into the composition of your questions that I think it's going to be better for me to just read your questions so I make sure we cover everything that you brought up, and then we can bring you in to discuss. And Helen, in particular, put some real thought into newsletters, as we had a little bit of discussion last week. So I've got several different questions from her. I'm going to disperse them throughout the session, so we kind of mix things up a little bit. But the first question is going to kind of come, it's a fundamental question about newsletters. And so let's go ahead and jump over to that. And Helen says, if I can get it up here we go. Basic concern about the newsletters, I'm just not getting much out of it in terms of business value. Oh, hold on, I've got to move my controls here. There we go. I'm wondering how to change that or how to reduce the rather significant time and effort that I put into it. Started my newsletter in 2015. Currently have 309 active subscribers. 72 have unsubscribed or been bounced off over the years. Current subscribers, 39% open often, 6% sometimes, and 47% rarely. I send out newsletters about 2 or 3 times a month, typically 1 or 2 short newsletters, for example, showing a new piece of work or an event, and 1 longer one explaining the steps I took in creating a piece, for example. The longer newsletters are the ones that readers respond to most often and really value, and they're also the ones that take the most time to create. In any month, I probably spend 1 working day just on newsletters. Yet, in all these years, I can only trace a few actual purchases, original works, prints, or books to this newsletter. It's important to note that most of my subscribers come through my Facebook page, which means I can't really duplicate the content of my social media posts in a newsletter. They subscribe to get something different and more substantive. Given that social media is becoming much more important for me in promoting my work, wouldn't this effort be better put into Facebook, Instagram, etc.? I have nearly 9,000 followers on Facebook, have made sales there. And for any run-of-the-mill post without boosting or making it into a formal ad, I typically get several hundred views and dozens of comments, which dwarfs my newsletter readership. Should I scale back on my newsletter, ramp it up, change the content or frequency? Am I thinking about this wrong? So there's a lot to unpack there, obviously. And I think that I chose specifically this question to start because I think that it is a great example of someone who is well into the newsletter process, right? I had a number of questions or just comments. I'm thinking about starting a newsletter. I'm trying to think about how to manage it. But this gives us an idea of what it might look like for us several years down the road if we do embark on a newsletter process and start creating newsletter campaigns and what we might expect. And I think there are several things for us to think about here. One is that newsletters do present some unique challenges. The biggest challenge, well, I'll say there are two big challenges. Number one is getting subscribers, right? How do we get people who already have a lot going on often in their inboxes? How do we get them to agree to receive our newsletter? So that's an uphill climb that takes a lot of time. And then two, just the effort that goes into maintaining maintaining the list, designing the newsletter, and then creating the ongoing content and doing that in a consistent way. And, in essence, as the publisher of a newsletter, you are exactly that. You're a publisher. And you have all the considerations that a publisher would have about thinking about schedules and content and editing and design and imagery, and you're doing that all in-house. Now, a lot of that has become simpler over the years as services like MailChimp and some of the other online newsletter services try to simplify that process, but it is still work. There's going to be work involved in putting a newsletter out, no matter how we cut it. I'm going to suggest just a few quick reactions to what you're saying, Helen. The first one that jumped out at me is you mentioned I can't duplicate or replicate what I'm publishing to my social media feed. To which I would say I disagree with that. That even though it's certainly possible that you are going to get some overlap there, we have found that if we're going to produce a piece of content of any sort and publish it in some way online, that we might as well publish that content, the text, the copy, the images, on every channel that we have access to. Does this mean that you're going to have some of your audience who's going to potentially see the same content more than once? Yes, but we've not found that to be a negative. If anything, there is a reinforcing effect of having someone say, oh yeah, I just saw this in the newsletter and here it is in my social media feed. I would see that as a positive. And so this means that you can think about potentially reducing the burden of the content creation in that you can repurpose it and reuse it. And in fact, I think if we're not doing that, we're missing out on a big opportunity. The other reality is you'll often be surprised that there's not nearly as much overlap as you might expect. That even if someone did get your newsletter in their inbox, as you just mentioned, there's a pretty good chance that a good percentage of them didn't see that particular email or were too busy when they were in their inbox and didn't take the time to look through it. Or even if they did see it, maybe they didn't read it fully. And now when it shows up in their social media feed, maybe they'll say, oh, I should give this a little bit of attention. So I would not see, any really potential conflict with repurposing that content. And so that being the case, as a publisher, you can kind of think about, okay, I'm going to be spending, you mentioned you're spending a day on the newsletter. Well, maybe I would say I'm going to spend a day a month creating all of my content for the month. Or maybe I'm going to split it up over a couple of days, but then I'm going to reuse that content. Now, I will also mention that a lot of the content that you're creating for your longer newsletter, you should think of that as going into your content library, where the information that you're sharing, for example, about techniques that you're using or experiences that you're having, it's very likely that a year from now or 18 months from now, you could take an old piece of content out of that library and say, I could adapt this a little bit and plug in some new images and reuse this content with very little modification and send it out again and get the full value of having sent that out. Many of you will know that I put out a newsletter for Red.blog, and I've done that regularly over the years. We have posts going all the time. And the reality is at this point that about 85% of those posts and content that are going out are literally just repeats. They were published, 2 years ago, and they're just on a cycle of getting reposted. And I'm not even doing any of the modification that I'm suggesting you might do by updating some of the imagery and that kind of thing. I'm literally just have it on a bit of an automatic rotation. Now, of course, I'm putting in new content all the time as well to keep it mixed up. But it's funny to me, some of my posts that go out will get a reaction that, thank you so much, Jason, for sharing this. It really had a huge impact on me reading this. And I'm so glad that you took the time to write this, and it just really opened my eyes and is a new concept that I'd never really thought of before. Well, if I go back in the comments from the last time that was posted, I might see a very similar comment from the exact same person for whom it was revelatory that first time around. We forget we have a lot of content coming our direction. And so what I'm saying is we can take an opportunity that there is going to be a big hill to climb in the content as well when we're first starting and just kind of thinking about what we want to be sharing and how we're what we want to say, but we can start to get some basically some creative capital that builds up over time where we can think about how to repurpose. I'm also going to say that there are some great opportunities coming with artificial intelligence, generative writing, ChatGPT and such, where you can take bits and pieces of what you've done and have the AI help you reorganize it and refresh it and make it new. And so I'm going to be sharing some insights and providing some new tools that I think will help there as well. But in essence, this is all coming back to that question of, okay, it's a lot of work. Should I be doing it? And what I want to say is, let's try and make it the minimal amount of work possible. If we can be creative and take some of the burden off ourselves, it's often a self-imposed burden of thinking we have to be writing Pulitzer Prize worthy newsletter content every single month and putting it out there. If we can take some of that burden off ourselves and reduce the overhead of creating our newsletter, it changes the equation a little bit, right? Now, having said that, the second part of that equation still has to come into play, and that is I'm putting this out and I'm doing it regularly, and even if it was easier, it's still not a main driver of my sales activity. It's not as if I send this email newsletter out and instantly my website lights up and people are contacting me for purchases. And so even if it's less work, I still have to ask, is it worth it? And that comes down to the question of what is the purpose of my email newsletter? And while certainly I have shared instances, even this last year, of cases where we have sent out a newsletter and we'll have a client contact us and make a significant purchase from the newsletter, that's the exception. We're putting out a newsletter basically during season. We really do get about one a week out, and then it slows down a bit during the summer. So if I had to estimate, I'd say we're putting out about 30 newsletters a year. So not quite once a week, but fairly regularly. And while I don't have good statistics on it, if I had to guess, I would say that on average in a year, we have a direct sale where someone is contacting us from the newsletter 3 or 4 times. So maybe 7 to 10% of the newsletters that we send out do result in sales. Now, it'd be great if we could apply that every time, but part of that is that, we've been building our email newsletter subscriber list for 20 years now, 22 years. And so our list is at about 6,000 subscribers. And so obviously that changes the equation as well. And that's just something that can only come with the buildup of time. So we're going to see some questions related to that. When is it worthwhile to even start creating a regular newsletter that's going out if I have a very small subscriber list? So I'll come to that part of the question. But from the purpose perspective, myself and my staff, as we talk about the newsletter, Of course, we're thrilled when we generate sales, but we don't think of it. We're not disappointed when we send an email newsletter out and don't see sales come in, because we have decided that our purpose with the newsletter is primarily awareness and exposure, to keep people thinking about Xanadu Gallery, and to keep it on their radar. And as I've mentioned here before, it was fairly revolutionary for us when we went from a once in a while, when we thought about it or when we were having a show kind of newsletter announcement, to a we're going to do this regularly and put it out, at least 3 times, 2.5, 3 times a month. The effect that we started to get of people mentioning that they get our newsletter when they come into the gallery was tremendous. And so, even with a smaller list, and even if I'm only getting 39% of that 300 people to open somewhat regularly, that means I'm getting 100, 120 people who with some frequency are thinking about Helen Reit's art, or are thinking about Melanie Nichols' art. It's a awareness factor that is beneficial there. It also puts us in the habit of content creation, and if we're able to, like I say, repurpose this content and use it across all of our platforms, social media, newsletter, and any other contacts that we're having, that being in that habit and having a system in place to put our newsletter or to put that content out regularly is a great habit to get in very early. And it just puts us in the mode of starting to think about, I better snap a photo of this so that I can put it in the newsletter. Let me mention one other quick thing on the content creation side of things, and Helen alluded to this, and that is that for us, most of our newsletters are very simple. In fact, it might even be a stretch to really call it a newsletter. It's an email with some images of some artwork typically, and a half a paragraph of content. We're featuring these artists. There's this particular theme we're looking at. And then mostly we're just copying and pasting images in. And so we really tried, we played with different levels of content. And for us, what we found to be most sustainable, I don't know if I can definitively say that it's most effective, but most sustainable is that we have to keep things fairly simple. We can't be devoting, I can't even be devoting a full day of my staff's time to creating an email. So we really had to think about what is the minimal level of viable content that we can put out that's going to do what we want it to do, keep people up to speed on what we're doing and thinking about us. And so those are the kind of things that I'd be thinking about is, if it's feeling overwhelming to put the newsletter out, I would be asking myself, what could I do to back off a little bit in terms of the amount of effort I'm putting in to put it out? And if I reduced that and got it to a point where really it was only taking me an hour or a couple of hours a month to create the content that I could then not only use on my newsletter, but everywhere else, then would it feel more sustainable to me? And so if I do that, and again, we'll experiment with it and try it and see kind of what happens. Then maybe it becomes a little bit less of a burden on us, and we don't feel like, we're pushing a big boulder up a hill that's not accomplishing anything. So that is going to be my first suggestion. And there we go. I've gotten through one question so far, but there's kind of a lot to talk about there. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our next question. And then obviously I do see some hands that have come up, but I'll open it up at the end. I want to go to this from Denny. Denny has a couple of items here. Just quickly first, and I'm going to summarize a little bit. He's mentioning that he got into or has been pursuing a gallery in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and that this was tougher. Communication was slow, almost non-existent on their part. It was a very busy gallery, and I had to be patient. Set up a Zoom interview, etc. But then he says at the end, I took 12 pieces with me for them to choose from, 5 for their November, December small work show, and 7 for a group show in February. The in-person meeting went well. They kept all 12 pieces, and I'm now represented by 4 galleries. So that was a bit of an aside, but we always like to throw out a congratulations as you bring on a new gallery. And I think that this idea of persistence does play into our conversation about newsletters as well. But his question on newsletters down at the bottom is, I only have a couple of clients on my email list. Should I start sending out an e-newsletter to those few? I've never done one, or wait until I build up a larger list, right? This is the question that I alluded to a few moments ago, is when do I start a newsletter? And again, this is a little bit of a tough question. I mean, if we're literally talking about 6 or 7 people on my email list, then I really do have to do a cost-benefit analysis. Again, my suggestion might be that it's a pretty good idea for us to be thinking in terms of exposure anyway, and of creating content anyway. And I know Denny's been doing some social media marketing. And so my suggestion might be, well, let's think then if we could set up a very simple template in my email system, and then take some of the content that I've been putting out on social media and copy and paste it over and send it out to the 7 people on my newsletter list, and it took me 5 minutes to do it, then at that point I could probably justify going ahead and getting started just for the benefit of creating the habit of content creation again. I'm going to mention that several times today, that there is something to be said for habits and setting up systems and kind of thinking things through and getting them going, even before they really have viability as a business practice. And so, my argument might be, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. The other thing I think that you'll see happening as you start saying to yourself, well, at least once a month, come hell or high water, and no matter how few people I have, I'm going to put out this newsletter. It's also going to put you in the mode that when you are out at a show or at events, that you're now going to think to yourself, yeah, I'm talking to people and they're not buying right now. I sure as heck better get them signed up to my newsletter list because I've got to grow that list. It puts a new imperative on building your newsletter list. And you might also think, I'm going to do some social media campaigning just to get email subscribers. And so I do think that there are times when it is justified to invest some time into creating an outlet for our content, even when we don't have a real audience for that yet, just for getting us up and running and in that kind of mode, to get some of the habits in place. So great question, Denny. And I know a lot of us are in a similar situation. And I'm sure some of you are saying, I only have 100 people, or I only have 200 people. So my answer is going to be the same. If we can think about a way to make it fairly easy on ourselves, let's go ahead and do that. Let me jump to a question from Liesel. And again, this is into some of more of the mechanics and technicalities, but I think it's all good things to be thinking about. And so I'll just take these one at a time. Have you found an ideal time of day and frequency to send them? I already mentioned our frequency, that we're really trying during the season to hit once a week. And we don't always get there, but that drive keeps us moving forward. Now, as far as the ideal time or day, we send ours out typically on either Friday or Saturday. We will schedule them. Sometimes there are slight adjustments that we'll make, just depending on what's going on with the gallery or an upcoming show or that kind of thing. But typically, we found that sending them out over the weekend tends for us to get the best open rates. And we watch that, right? And as I'm sure you do, most modern email platforms give you the ability to see opens. And so we've found that if we're going into people's inboxes when they don't have the same volume of business and other email coming in, tends to be more effective for us. But I would experiment with it. Try it on different days and see which gets the best results for you. Time of day, we don't pay as much attention to it. It seems to be somewhat random. We will just, a lot of times we're just sending it out once we've got the content completed. And if that process is happening on a Friday or a Saturday, we'll go ahead and just send it as it gets ready. Maybe eventually we'll start to pay a little bit more attention to that. And that is something that professional email marketers are gauging very carefully. We're maybe not quite at the same volume that they are to pay a lot of attention to that. Number two, how much personal story versus showing available art would you include? More of one or the other? And what I would say is that a mix is probably going to be ideal for an artist where it is a more personal, direct communication. I like Helen's idea of kind of thinking about doing some balance where you're thinking that once or twice a month, I just have art content going out. Maybe I have a brief blurb about what inspired the piece, but it's mostly about the art. And then maybe thinking about once a month, or maybe it's even once every other month when you're starting, telling a little bit more of a story. And Helen mentioned that those are the ones that get more response. And I think you'll find if you're repurposing that content, and doing it on social media, that when you do the posts that have more of that personal or technical information where you're sharing more, they're likely to get more content, or more response from your social media following as well. But it's just not sustainable to think that every single week I'm going to write something with a lot of personal appeal to it. I'm going to burn myself out just from the effort, and also my life, there's not that much going on in my life. And so we just want to, again, be thinking about sustainability as much as engagement, and so vary it a bit. Number three, ideal length of a newsletter: send shorter ones more frequently or longer ones bi-weekly. So that's a great question. And my suggestion would be that my preference would be to be more frequent. That, if you're doing super long email newsletter posts, number one, people are going to fear, even if they're not experiencing it, they're going to fear some fatigue in taking in that content. So I'm never afraid to send out a long newsletter and longer communication if I feel like I've got something that I want to share that way. But if given the choice and thinking about how I'm going to allocate my effort, I would suggest that it would be more efficacious to think about more frequency. And you might even think about, with some of your longer personal posts, doing it as a part one and part two, where this week you're getting the first half of the story and next week you're getting the second half of the story, and you got something to anticipate coming up. So I would err on the side of frequency as opposed to length. Number four, what elements have been most effective? What elements have your most effective newsletters had in common? And here you could think about, okay, what kind of imagery or what kind of stories would be most effective? But I'm going to just kind of repeat myself here and say that it's actually the consistency that is the most important element. The putting it out regularly and increasing the surface area of content that people can encounter. And with that in mind, you can take the pressure off yourself and just put out whatever is of interest to you right now, whatever you're working on. The obvious content for you as an artist to be putting out regularly is your new work. I would not see any reason, depending on the speed with which you work, the vast majority of your newsletters could be kind of fresh from the studio. Here's my latest piece of artwork. And if you're producing one piece a week, most of your newsletters might be, this is the piece I produced this week. And here's a little bit of the story behind it. Or if this month is a little crazy for you, it might literally just be the image of the artwork with the title, the size, the medium, and the price, and here's my newest piece. You do not need to put out Pulitzer Prize content with each newsletter. We really can your work is the focal point, and you've put a lot of work and effort into creating this art. Let's let it do most of the talking in a lot of the emails. And if you sign up, and I encourage you to do this, sign up for the Xanadu Gallery newsletter, you're going to see that is mostly what's coming out in our newsletter, our imagery of art with the information about that artwork. And so that would be the focus. Number 5, how much time and how often do you recommend we spend crafting our newsletters? I think hopefully I've alluded to that a bit. If I were maybe giving you some hard numbers to think about as you're starting a newsletter, a total of 3 hours a month. I think there could be some benefit to doing those 3 hours all at once, or at least figuring out your content schedule for the month all at once and maybe plugging some images in as you go along. But this does not need to be something that's intruding on your studio time with great regularity. We want to really try and systematize and minimize the impact that it's having on our other efforts. And again, I might not think of those 3 or 4 hours as my newsletter time. I would think of it as my 3 or 4 hours of content time. And that the content I produce during this period is yes, going to be going to my newsletter, but it's going to be going out on my social media channels as well. And then I'm going to schedule when I'm doing that, and then I'm done. And I don't need to think about it until the same day next month when I put another 3 or 4 hours into it. And so block that time off so that you can be very focused on producing that content. Is it important to link every image of a painting to a buy now page? Should we include prices on our newsletter? Is it critical to do that? Well, if my main purpose is awareness, it might not be critical to do that. But is there a good reason not to link to the artwork and include the pricing? I sure can't think of one. And why wouldn't I give someone an opportunity who's seeing the artwork and they're interested in it, the opportunity to click through to my website and potentially make a purchase? I'm even going to go a little further than that. And I'm going to suggest that you do as we do on our newsletter. And again, subscribe and you'll see it. And we put a button below each piece of artwork. Sometimes the language changes, but the essence of this button is buy now. And so we are explicitly, we're making it clear to the recipients of our newsletter that a purchase is not only an opportunity, but it's a reality. All you have to do is click on this button and you can own that piece of artwork. Could I lose some subscribers who were put off by the commercial nature of my newsletter? Perhaps. We don't see it. But the benefit of giving people that opportunity is blatantly clear. And so I wouldn't be afraid to be explicit. I would definitely, at a bare minimum, I would definitely include pricing with the artwork on my newsletter. It is one of the statistics that people are going to want to know. You're going to include the size, you're going to include the medium. Why would I not go the one step further and include the factor that is likely most interesting to a potential buyer, which is going to be the price? So I'm going to be fairly adamant on that one. And then if I'm doing that, I might as well have the link to click through and potentially make the purchase. And then you should also include a link for contact. Yes, they could just reply to your email, but I would go ahead and include a link that allows them to click on it and automatically brings up a new composer message to you, so that it explicitly invites them to reach out and contact you. And the more explicit we can be, the happier we are going to be in our contacts with our clients. Okay, I just got a couple more, and then I know you're going to have questions, and I do see the hands coming up. But let me go to another question from Helen. And I think this is another important one that is going to be a factor a little further down the line for a lot of us, but worth starting to think about now in terms of our overall strategy. And that is that my newsletter subscriber list contains a lot of dead wood, people who don't open as often as I'd like. 47% open rarely. What really puzzles me, though, is that often these are people who signed up recently and voluntarily from either social media or my website. So an example, in the last 30 days, I had 6 new subscribers. Of those, 3 have opened all or nearly all newsletters since they signed up. And 3, never opened anything, including the welcome message sent to them immediately after signing up. I'm baffled. These people chose to sign up and typed their own email addresses into the form. They don't bother to read any of the newsletters, thinking the newsletter might go into their junk mail folder. I've tried sending them a personal note using the Gmail address rather than the Disappearing West professional email, and basically saying, thank you for subscribing. Please check your junk mail folder. But this hasn't done any good. Have you experienced this? Any idea what I can do about it, or should I just archive those addresses after a certain period of time? So yes, and I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, because this is absolutely par for the course with email newsletter subscribers. If we think about it, the lower the bar to entry is for someone to do something, the less likely they are to subscribe or to follow through with it, to do the intended action that we want them to achieve. So yes, they had to put their email address in, and they were interested enough in your post or whatever interaction they were having with you on your website that they did do that. But, how hard is it, and how much of a sacrifice is it to put in your email address? It's pretty easy. And so I'm going to point to a personal example in my life. And I want to be careful about this because I don't want to sound critical, but my wife, Carrie, is a great example of this. If you send Carrie a critical email, like someone's life depends on her reading that email, that person is likely to end up dead, because she gets overwhelmed by her inbox. And in fact, to so much so to the point, I went in about a year ago to her inbox, and I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like 30 or 40,000 unread email messages in her inbox. And I said, Carrie, it's no wonder you can't respond to important emails that are coming in, because you're overwhelmed. And so I for a short time took over her inbox, and I used one of the services. It's called Unroll.me, and it goes through and sees all the junk newsletters, all the commercial newsletters, and just bulk unsubscribes for them. So I did that. And then for a good time thereafter, I was actively in her inbox monitoring what was going on and deleting stuff. And bless her heart, she signs up. Oh, this is interesting. Here's an interesting newsletter about X. You fill in the blank, menu planning or whatever it was. And just almost reflexively signs up for it. And the problem with that is that you haven't paid anything for it. You've made no sacrifice. It was free. And so it's easy to sign up. And what you're going to find is the majority of people who sign up for your newsletter are going to be these kinds of people who it's just very low commitment, and they may have the best of intentions. They really did like your artwork, and they thought to themselves, I would love to see Helen's artwork in my inbox. But the reality is, if we went into their inbox, we would see many dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of other newsletters that they've signed up for. And it's just impossible that they're going to get to very many of them. Occasionally, yours will happen to have come in right at a moment, and they might click on it. And that's probably some of the sometimes people that you're getting. But the vast majority of subscribers are going to be rarely. And do we see this? Yes. Are our percentages similar to yours? Very much so. And even more than that, some of our subscribers who fall into the rarely category are people who have bought artwork from us. That's how they got onto the list. And so they were at a higher level of commitment in the sense that they've had an interaction with us and come onto our list. But the reality of email is just that people don't look at very much of it or spend very much time on it. So what to do about it? Our approach has been not to worry about it. Our focus is on, let's just build our list bigger and bigger and bigger. And we know that we're going to get the vast majority of those people not interacting with us, but we have to build this big list in order to get to the 30 to 40% who will sometimes interact with us. And so having that mindset of just volume is the name of the game here. Yes, I want them to be as qualified as possible, but I'm just going to get to those good subscribers by having to sort through some of the others. And so what should you do about your list as it continues to accumulate? Well, I would say that if you're on an email service, most of the email services are set up they charge you by the number of subscribers you're allowed to have. And so for a lot of us, if we have 300 or 400, 700 subscribers, we're only running up against the minimums of the subscriber list. And it's not really costing us anything to have those low response people on our list. And so, until it starts costing me more, I would be tempted to keep them on my list. As long as it's not getting to a point where suddenly my rarely is now 80 or 90% of my list, then I want to do something about it. And I'll talk about what to do in just a second. But in the meantime, I just am going to focus on getting people on the list, and I'm not going to worry about the ones who don't respond. I'm not going to spend any time feeling exasperated by them, why they would do this. It's just some quirk of human nature that they've signed up. Now, as my list starts to grow and I do start running against limits, and this is certainly the case for us, we are unabashedly and boldly excited to slash people from our email newsletter list. And if people are not responding or opening, I feel like I'm pretty generous in giving them a 3-month window to respond to something, since we're sending out every single week. If you haven't opened a single email in 90 days from me, and I've sent out, 10, 12 newsletters, you're gone. Now, the way we do this is we actually have an automation, but you could achieve the same effect manually. And that is, we send one last email out. Dear subscriber, we notice that you're not opening our newsletters, and we understand that your inbox can be full and that it can be a real challenge. And so, we don't want to clutter up your inbox needlessly. And so we're going to unsubscribe you from your list unless you would like to stay on the list. If you'd like to stay on our list, click on this link. And you might think of a different way to do it. On a smaller list, I might say something like, just email me and let me know, and I'll make sure you stay on the list. That's how we did it initially before we had the automation in place. And then if I don't hear back from that customer within the next week, they're gone. And I feel no compunction about taking them off the list. They didn't pay anything to get on my list, or even if they did buy something from us, they're not responding now. I get no value out of having them on the list, and especially if it starts costing me more. And then the other thing to think about here is deliverability, and that is that if 80% or 90% of my list aren't subscribing, I am increasing the likelihood that Gmail and Outlook are going to start to say, this must not be good content. And so it is worth thinking about, those numbers. But most of us are not running into an issue at this point in our newsletter that we have to worry about that. But when we get to that point, there's no reason to keep someone on our list who's never opening anything. And so you want to not be afraid to get them off of your list. Okay, I think I have one more. Let's see, I have one other question. I misspelled Laura here. Apologies to Laura. But the question is, I don't even need to bring it up. What are the best practices for including, excluding pricing on the newsletter? I already mentioned, go ahead and include it. My current practice is not to be salesy in my newsletter content, but I always provide a link to the paintings page on my website where the price and details are publishable. Is that too soft an approach, too pushy, or in Goldilocks territory? And so again, I'm just going to say that for me, I have no fear of veering a little bit on that side towards salesy. I want to sell artwork. I'm not ashamed of that. I know that when people buy artwork, it's going to make their lives better. And I certainly don't feel that including the price and an invitation to buy the artwork is too pushy. Now, am I sending out an email that has a big, bold headline that says, buy now, jump on the art wagon and that kind of pushy salesy thing? No. we are a little bit balanced in that, but having a price tag and a link with an opportunity to purchase, in my opinion and in my experience, and over the years of sending out newsletters, is just not too far. And anyone who feels it is too far and unsubscribes from our list can have a very happy life without getting our newsletter. And I wish them well, but I'm just not going to give up the sales that we do make, because I'm afraid to have shown pricing information and encourage them to make a purchase. And I told you all the story this spring where we had clients driving across Texas. They were driving from their home in Florida to their home in Sedona and got our newsletter while they were driving. And, we're talking about it and showing each other, probably dangerously, as they were barreling down the freeway at 90 miles an hour, showing each other this image, and then called us and put a deposit on it as they were driving across Texas. And, could they have done that without us having the pricing and buy now information? Maybe, but they wouldn't have had the same discussion. They would have had to call us and ask the price and then think about it some more. And they didn't have to do that because they knew everything they needed to know up front to make the purchasing decision on the spot. And so, again, I'm just going to be a big advocate of providing as much information as possible. Okay, and then this last one from Helen is on a little bit more specific, but let me pull it up here. Send my newsletter through MailChimp, though my subscriber numbers are below what is necessary for a free account. About 6 years ago, I did a paid subscription because it gave me access to their technical help chat line, which I thought would be useful as I got to know the platform. However, I rarely use the technical features. Meanwhile, MailChimp keeps adding complicated features I don't want or need. I just want to compose and send the newsletter out as quickly and easily as possible. They're now offering AI features, detailed planning programs for multiple channels, messages, customer graphic, and so on, right? We've all been there. On December 1st, MailChimp is having yet another rate hike. They are, though, offering me a one-time opportunity as a legacy subscriber to drop back down to the free level with a very basic service. Probably maintain that free level for quite a while since my subscriber count well below the 500 threshold for free accounts. And I could easily archive half of those addresses without losing regular readers. If I ever had a much larger subscriber base and wanted more advanced features, I could always upgrade. Can you think of any reason why I shouldn't drop back down to the most basic form of MailChimp? And this is a great practical question because, again, we're all going to have to face this kind of issue. And Helen, no, I can't see any reason not to drop back down. We want to think about what our purpose is and what the fundamental features are of the newsletter that we want to have going out. And in terms of that, the core competency of our email program is storing email addresses, allowing people to easily sign up and unsubscribe, making it easy for me to put together the newsletter itself, the design, although to call it easy when you're first starting is probably a bit of an exaggeration. There's always going to be a learning curve. But I would always prefer to use the minimal tool that will get the job done for me. And even we have decided we have a fairly complex and automated newsletter system, but even that, we knew that there were features we wanted to have and capabilities that we wanted to have, and we looked for the platform that would give us the simplest approach to achieving what we wanted to achieve and at the lowest price. And so my suggestion would be keep it free if you can. And only when you're using that free platform and you say to yourself, I really wish I could do something that I'm not able to do on this free platform. I really need to be able to do that. And it may be something like eventually my list is big enough. I do want to think about some automated features and so on. But until I get to that point, I'm going to be perfectly content using the free service. And boy, we can use that across a lot of what we're doing. Okay, there are still several other questions waiting in there, but we've got about 10 minutes left. And I do want to open this up for some discussion. I think I'm going to go ahead. I've got a number of hands raised. I'm going to go, well, maybe I am. I'm going to lower hands because they've been raised a while. And then I want you to go ahead and click on it again. I'm not trying to keep you out, but I just want to make sure I'm answering or bringing you in with a real question. So let me go first to Catherine, and then I'll go to Michael, and we'll keep going from there. Catherine.
Hello. My point that I wanted to make, sorry, I've lost my voice a bit, is that we should always keep an email list. So don't rely on social media, because if they close the platform or if they decide that you're an undesirable and they chuck you off, you will lose your followers. And although I know they can be very valuable, people have made big headways getting people to their list by using social media. Those don't belong to you. Only your email list belongs to you.
Yeah, no, Catherine, it's a really important point, and one that I 100% agree with. You know that I'm all in on social media right now, and that we've been making a big investment there. But there is no way I would give up my direct lines of communication with potential customers, and chiefly newsletter being the key one, because it does allow me a direct connection to potential buyers that I just can't get any other way. And you're right. We're big on Facebook and Meta Instagram right now, but not only might they kick us off, but they just might become less popular, and I might have to completely rebuild everything I've done on another platform. Can I do that? Yes, I can. But in the meantime, I want to be able to keep those emails. An email subscriber, in our estimation, is worth 10 times what a social media follower is worth. That's how we kind of think about how much we're willing to invest in getting social media followers as opposed to email subscribers. And that's probably a bit of an underestimate, but that's our going assumption right now. So you'd want to think about that.
Yeah, we mustn't forget that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Michael, let me go to you.
Good morning, everybody. I just had a couple of comments. One, Helen, people don't pay as much attention as you imagine they do. Tom Antion is a big internet guy. He was a lineman for the Green Bay Packers and turned into an internet guru many years ago. And he tells this story. He offers a bereavement document for people who don't know what to say at funerals. And on one website, it's sold for $9.95. And on another website, the exact same thing sold for $19.95. And more people buy the more expensive one than the cheaper one. They just don't pay that much attention to how often you contact them. And so I wouldn't worry about that. And as far as frequency, I blog once a month, if that. And from my perspective, less is more. You leave them wanting to hear the next time you contact them. And if it's too frequent, you're like a little fly buzzing around them. So once you build up a following, every 5 or 6 weeks is certainly enough to keep in touch with them. The other thing, Denny's comment, I don't have that many in the newsletter. People don't know how many people are subscribing to you. They don't know where the bodies are buried, and you don't have to tell them. As far as they know, you are killing it out there, and they're lucky to be on your list. So, keep thinking positively about that, and don't worry about the little numbers. And as far as people signing up and not reading it, I sign up. I have all good intentions, and sometimes I sign up just for the safety of it. I like this person. Eventually, I'm going to read what they write if the headline is intriguing enough to me. But knowing that I have them coming into my inbox is comforting. And at some point, I do purge my inbox because I realize I'm not just reading their stuff. But if the headline grabs them, then they're going to read it. And I learned a lot of this when I had my own podcast. I was doing the show live every Friday morning, and I had maybe 3 listeners, but I had over 10,000 a month podcast downloads when it was put on Apple iTunes, and people were listening to it and subscribing for the convenience of listening into it later. And even though it crushed my ego that nobody called in for the giveaways I had, people were listening to the podcast and writing to me afterwards. So always think of it as a positive experience, and you're building towards a long-term goal with short-term metrics, but don't get too thrown by the negative aspects of those metrics. It all works out in the end.
Yeah.
Sorry I took so much time. Thank you.
No. Those excellent points, and great perspective. And yes, you know, it is, it can be disheartening. I don't want to downplay that at all. And there's a lot that we do that we're like, oh, do we have to keep doing this? But you know, again, I would just encourage us to think of it as an investment that's building capital for us. I think I saw that Mason had a comment, and then I'll go to Michelina.
Okay, I just had a strange thing. I've been sending out a MailChimp newsletters about every other week for my watercolors. And then the other weeks that I send out my glass art newsletters, I just post a photograph with nothing else on my photographs album in Facebook. And I get more likes and responses on just the photograph rather than the newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And boy, aren't you lucky? I feel so much happier to be having this conversation today with all of us who are visual artists than if I were trying to have a similar conversation with authors, where all they have to put out is the written word. You know, it's just they have to really work, and it's no mistake that they are adding imagery and stock photos to their output, because they know that human beings are visually driven, and that to get their attention, we really need to have some imagery. So let's not at all feel bad if a lot of our content that we're putting out is just artwork. You know, other creatives out there would kill to get the kind of attention that you get by putting out an image of your artwork. So don't be afraid to have that be your primary focus of your content. Thank you, Mason. Let me go to Michelina.
Hi, everyone. So I've constantly or consistently put out Facebook posts and Instagram posts once a month asking people to sign up to my newsletter, and I've had no success. So I'm just wondering, you know, what tips does anyone have to increase your subscription list?
Yes, so it's a great question. And I do like this idea of being explicit in the invite. Sign up for my newsletter. Tell them what they're going to get. Sign up for my newsletter, and you're going to get cool images of art. Show an image of some of the art into your newsletter. It's free. You know, you're really going to have to be salesy. We hate to use that word, but I'm going to have to be salesy to get people to sign up to my newsletter. Now, there are other ways to do it. I've seen artists who will do a free giveaway. We had, I believe it was Laura who was going to do some attempts, free giveaways of prints or posters or greeting cards. Sign up for my newsletter and get a chance to win this free, that kind of thing. That will be a way to really get some volume in. And we did talk about the benefits of getting some volume. But my concern with that is, one, that the quality of the people who are signing up, I think you're going to see a significant boost in the number of people who signed up but never look at a newsletter. That's going to go way up if you're giving away something for free. You know, they're not that interested, but hey, why wouldn't I sign up for a free giveaway? And do we really just want people signed up who are only in it to get something free? And so I'm a little hesitant. Not to say you can't do that kind of thing, and it certainly can boost your numbers, and you never know that you might start to get to some of that percentage of people who are truly interested. But we have just found that by doing a paid ad on the Facebook or Instagram platform, and they have ads that are specifically set up to add email subscribers to your newsletter list. Where Facebook and Meta will, I keep saying that, Facebook and Instagram will pre-populate their email address into the form, and all they have to do is click subscribe, and now they're on your email newsletter list. I haven't done as much of that with the gallery, but I do a fair amount of that with Red.blog, and that we found that to be the least expensive way to get additional subscribers. And you could do something similar to your newsletter. And certainly in the beginning, when I'm really trying to, you know, get some subscribers on my list, that could be a good way to start to increase those numbers. And there is a session in the Social Marketing Insider where we specifically talk about building a campaign to get new subscribers. So I would recommend that. And I'll try and include a link to that particular session in the resources for today's broadcast.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. With that, I do have to sign us off today. I've got the reason I'm at home is because I've got an art delivery to some clients who live very near our home. And so I've got to take off to do that. Let's continue this conversation, though, in the LinkedIn group. If you have some additional suggestions or questions or discussion, go ahead and post it there. We will be back next week in this session for an open Q&A. And if you want to, there's no reason we couldn't continue this conversation with additional questions next Friday. So as you think about your newsletter and additional issues that might come up, feel free to include those in next week's session. But we'll look forward to seeing you next week, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session, for your great questions and comments.